Hey, everybody, welcome back to Truth Revealed. We're about to jump into episode 2 of the Oprah Winfrey interview of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. And what we are uncovering here is why the whole exit happened. We're getting all of that information here from this interview. So there were rumors about you being Hurricane Meghan for the departure of several high-profile palace staff members. And there was also a story. Did you hear this one about you making Kate Middleton cry? Oprah now has to be sensitive and not say, look, it sounds like you're lying. Like who would not know that? So she has to continue this line of questioning in a non-confrontational way. This is actually a really good question. And she moves on to what she was really getting at anyways, was the spectacle that has become Kate versus Meghan. Oprah knows that Meghan Markle has heard of that. Did you hear this one about you making Kate Middleton cry? And then Meghan says, this I heard about. This is an indicator of closeness versus that is an indicator of distance. And that is the literal definition of those words. Deception detection aside, when somebody says, I'm talking into this microphone, not that microphone, they mean there's something that's physically close to them as opposed to something else that's farther away. Because that's the literal definition of the word, your brain is going to automatically use that subconsciously to describe things. If you feel that something is close to you, you will say this. And if you feel like something is far away, even emotionally, you'll say that. And she says, this I heard about. The initial gut reaction when somebody says the incident about you making Kate Middleton cry, at this moment, that doesn't seem to be a story that bothers her. Most people would say this I heard about, but if this was a big deal to her, I would expect her to say that I heard about. When you hear that, when you hear me say that, this I heard about compared to that I heard about. Those are two different things. Meghan Markle says, this I heard about. This tells me that she doesn't currently have hard feelings about that incident. Why wouldn't she? I mean, this was a huge deal to the public. This is a huge deal to the press. How could this not be a big deal to her? Well, maybe it isn't a big deal. Now, Oprah's not going to let it go. Obviously, this is a big topic. So we're going to get follow-up questions. Oprah's going to make Meghan Markle relive that event from start to finish so that she can tell us about it. So Oprah says, you heard about that. Okay. And Meghan says, this was, so she repeats this. She starts again by saying this. And then as she starts pulling from memory, it's no longer how she currently feels about it. She says, that was. And then now it's like her brain, her mind zoned in on the memory. So she says, that was a turning point. And you can see it, you can feel the verbiage paints a picture. It takes you from a happy Meghan to an unhappy Meghan. And it looks like a little train ride here. That was a turning point. I'm interested. Tell us more. That was a turning point, is what Oprah says. Just let her keep talking. And Meghan says, yeah, truthful, but sensitive. That wasn't a yes. She chooses her words and then she says them definitively with confidence. Yeah has a lack of confidence to it. So that was a turning point. She says, yeah, that's truthful, but sensitive. Then she says, the narrative with Kate, narrative is a way of describing something. And whenever you have other words that you can choose from, then we want to pay attention to the way that she chooses to describe it. So the narrative with Kate, which didn't happen, was really, really difficult and something that I think that's when everything changed, really. She starts talking about the narrative, which means I expect to see some stress here. I expect to see that palace language. The narrative is going to be what the firm puts out, right? The firm is the public relations and communication. That is something that the firm created, is what Meghan Markle is telling you. The narrative with Kate, which didn't happen, that is an awfully direct, confident way of saying that, which didn't happen, was really, really difficult and something that I think that's when everything changed, really. Okay, so before she said that's when the penny dropped. Remember when she was meeting with the Queen, with Harry's grandmother, she said, that's when the penny dropped. That means that's when the veil was first lifted. This isn't going to be what I thought it was. Now we have an indicator that things changed at this point. Some notes on this. She says the narrative with Kate. So she doesn't give a proper introduction. She doesn't say Kate Middleton and doesn't give her title. So you have an improper introduction with Kate Middleton and you have the word with. There's two indicators of sensitivity there. And then she says, which didn't happen. We know it did happen, but we know it didn't happen because there's no deception when she says which didn't happen. So we have this logical conundrum that we're dealing with also. She says was really, really difficult and something that I think that's when everything changed. Okay, so something changed. We have two things that we need to keep in mind now. Everything changed and there was conflict with Kate, even though she says that incident didn't happen. Let's keep going. Oprah, how are you going to handle this? She says, you say the narrative with Kate, it didn't happen. So specifically, did you make Kate cry? Great question. I love this. So specifically, did you make Kate cry? Meghan says no. All right, that's too short to determine anything unless I've baselined them. And I know that no is truthful. I'm not going to give that person the benefit of the doubt. No here can be deceptive, even though it's direct. So we need more. Was there a situation where she might have cried or she could have cried? So we're going to get that information here. And Meghan says, no, the reverse happened. That's a weird way of phrasing that. But remember, one of our core principles here is that we simply take their word choice and we look for repetition of that word. Now, most people are going to say it was the opposite. The opposite happened. That doesn't mean that everyone is going to use the word opposite. It's only problematic if she uses the reverse happened and then she says the opposite happened later. That means there's a change in reality and she chose a different word because in each person's mind, each word represents something very specific. So if you change a word that is supposed to represent the same thing in your statement, it means something changed. The definition of those words is different. I get a lot of questions about different people use different words. How can you say that something is universal? Well, the rules apply all the time, but not the specifics. The first thing that you got to do is baseline somebody. And the second thing you got to do is look for changes in language, not the specific language that's initially used. No one is going to say, I put on my sidearm in the morning and I took off my gun at night. It doesn't matter the words that you use to start with. If you say I put my sidearm on in the morning and I took my sidearm off at night, it means sidearm is what you call it, and nothing changed from the morning to the night. Here, I'm not saying that use of the word reversed is problematic. It's different, but it's only problematic if she changes that later. I highlighted it here to give you that explanation because it sounds weird. Because my wife was like, the reverse happened? That's weird. It should be the opposite. Is that an indicator of deception? I told her, no, that's not an indicator of deception. We want to see if that word changes later. So I'm putting that in here. And I didn't say that to be disparaging to anyone because it was a really hard week of the wedding. So Meghan says, no, meaning there's nothing that would have made her cry. No. The reverse happened. That means Kate Middleton made Meghan Markle cry. Does that jive with what we saw earlier? The narrative with Kate, so conflict between her and Kate, which didn't happen, meaning the narrative didn't happen. Okay, if it was the opposite, or as she calls it, the reverse, that would make sense. Meghan didn't make Kate cry. If Kate made Meghan cry, then there would be conflict between them. So that does actually give context to that previous statement. And I don't say that to be disparaging to anyone now because, so technically this is a negative statement followed by an explanatory statement. It was a really hard week of the wedding. Now, why do we have this indicator of deception here? I mentioned in a couple sentences back that we have this indicator that the palace is being deceptive here because we have a negative statement followed by an explanatory statement. So subconsciously, Meghan Markle is telling you that this reverse incident is a huge lie that was perpetrated by the palace. She's telling you that Kate Middleton made her cry and that there's a false narrative that was put out by the palace, by the communications PR section of the palace. Now, she hasn't said that. I'm telling you that that's coming out from her verbiage here. I would expect to see something about that in the very near future based on this verbiage, because according to the rules that we've established for her language, that is exactly what she's telling us at this point. So it was a hard week of the wedding. So it wasn't her wedding because we know her wedding was 3 days before. And she, meaning Kate Middleton, was upset about something, but she owned it. She apologized and she brought me flowers and a note apologizing. And she did what I would do if I knew that I hurt someone, right? To just take accountability for it. Wow. Okay. The most important thing to me is not only is this truthful, but you have to keep in mind that Kate Middleton is a part of the royal family. So I would not be surprised to see negative statements thrown into here if Meghan Markle had this feeling when she was talking about Kate Middleton, like Kate Middleton was part of the royal family, like she was part of the problem. If you get that sort of generally broad sweeping emotion from her, that those negatives thrown into here, then that's telling you Kate Middleton is a regular long-term source of drama for her that she lumps into the category of the palace in general. That Kate Middleton is part of Meghan's problems, but she doesn't say that here. She actually doesn't use the negatives here, which means that the way that Meghan Markle sees Kate Middleton is that she married into the family and that she is more genuine than the palace facade in general. So this is high praise for Kate Middleton coming from Meghan Markle subconsciously. And so she was upset about something, but she owned it and she apologized and she brought me flowers and a note apologizing. And she did what I would do if I knew that I had hurt someone, right? So she throws in the right, which is her way of saying this is common sense, but it might not be common knowledge. So she truthfully says, but Kate owned it. And she says she, but she's referring to Kate. Kate Middleton owned it. She apologized. She brought me flowers and a note apologizing. That's very specific detail. If somebody was lying, they would not be adding in that type of specific information because that's something that you can go back and check. Apologizing. And she did what I would do if I knew that I had hurt someone. So she's telling you that Kate hurt her, but she took accountability for it. And so she forgives her. What was shocking was, and then her train of thought, it's a fork here and goes off. What was 6-7 months after our wedding, that the reverse of that would be out in the world. So this incident happened during the week of the wedding, and then she's saying that the story came out 6 or 7 months later and that she was shocked. Now she uses the word reversed again. This tells me that it's meaningless to us. That's just how she phrases it. If she would have said that the opposite happened, I would say, no, there's a change in reality from the beginning to the end, which this is actually a great example of what we look for, how that change of language works. We literally have reverse in the first sentence and reversed in the last sentence. And it's the same word, which means that there's no change in reality from the beginning to the end of this. So as she starts her story, it doesn't change. There's no incident that happens in the middle of it, which is usually an incident that you do. So if Meghan Markle had done something to wrong Kate Middleton in the middle of this paragraph, she would have started by saying reversed and she would have ended by saying the opposite or vice versa. But because she started with reversed and she ended with reversed, that tells me that exactly what happened in here is what happened. So that's interesting. Oprah follows up. So when you say, and Meghan says, I would have never wanted that to come out about her ever, even though it happened, I protected that from ever being out in the world. Okay, so now we do have some actual real indicators of deception here. She says never, and then she follows it up by ever. So she's doubling down on the never. And never is always problematic. So we have to see if it's used correctly or what it means here. So she says, I would have never. Now that's very problematic. When you put would before never, it's a reduction of commitment. It's turning this whole thing into a hypothetical situation by using the word would. And then it's saying that this hypothetical situation lasts for an eternity. It is true in the dawn of time to the end of time. And that makes this deceptive. Meghan Markle here says, I would never have wanted that to come out about her ever. Okay, so let's think about that. Does she want that to come out? Yes, she does. And she's actually saying it right now. So that clearly means that she does want it to come out. Now, that shows you that the word never is always problematic. And when you think about the logic here, I would never, ever want that to come out about her. It's the right thing to say, but it's not the truth. And she says, even though it happened, I protected that from ever being out in the world. Okay, that's interesting. So she wanted people to know the truth. That's clear because she used the word never, ever, and she's currently telling me the truth. So that means she wanted it to come out. But then she uses the word I protected. I protected that from ever being out in the world. Protected doesn't mean that you kept quiet. She doesn't say, she made me cry and I never told anybody about that. She doesn't phrase that in the way that you would expect. Let's continue to look at this. The word that refers directly to the conflict with Kate. She says, I protected that from ever being out in the world. That is distance. And she protected that story from coming out into the world. Meghan Markle has the information that somebody was trying to get. We know that because she says protected. She doesn't say, I just didn't put it out in the world. She says, I protected it. So somebody else had the ability to get that information and she shut that down. Oprah now says, so when you say the reverse happened, explain to us what you mean by that. We're getting indicators from Meghan Markle. We're not getting a whole lot of information. So Meghan, a few days before the wedding, she was upset about something pertaining All right, now she realizes that she said it was the reverse that happened. And then Oprah actually rephrased and said that again. When you say the reverse happened, explain to us what you mean by that. So Meghan Markle now feels like the incident was about the flower girl dresses and Kate made me cry. And I just said that the reverse happened. It's possible you can interpret that as nothing about that story was true. So she says a few days before the wedding, she was upset about something pertaining. And she says, yes, the issue is correct. It was about the flower girl dresses. So she says, yes, the issue was correct about flower girl dresses. And it made me cry. And it really hurt my feelings. And I thought, in the context of everything else that was going on in those days leading to the wedding, that it didn't make sense to not be just doing what everyone else was doing, which was trying to be supportive and knowing what was going on with my dad and whatnot. Meghan Markle is telling us here. And I thought, in the context of everything else that was going on in those days leading up to the wedding, all right, so that's setting the stage. Of course, she did say that it made me cry. She said that truthfully, but let's look at the rest of the statement here, because as soon as somebody says something, they're always going to follow up with more information that gives us more of the true story. And so she says, it didn't make sense to not just be doing what everyone else was doing. Okay, so she uses two negatives in here. It didn't make sense to not be just doing what everyone else was doing. She's talking directly about the facade that's being created by the palace about the big wedding, right? The fake wedding. It didn't make sense to not just be trying to be supportive. So she's saying that everyone else was trying to be supportive of her, but knowing what was going on with my dad and whatnot. You oftentimes get the real truth tagged on right at the end of a paragraph. It's the last thing that somebody throws in there. Meghan Markle does the same thing. The reason that Meghan Markle started crying was because of the conflict with her dad. Really had nothing to do with the wedding, right? This big staged part of the facade. Now, the incident with Kate Middleton obviously was the triggering incident. Everybody else was doing a pretty good job of just going with the flow. I don't know how much say the bride has in what she wears and what the flower girls wear. There's probably a lot of that is dictated by the palace. It has to have this kind of theme, it has to be this length, but I'm sure that the bride has some aspect of control in how she wants the overall feel to be. And I think everybody was kind of going along with that, knowing that there was some drama there and it was causing Meghan Markle a lot of stress. And her dealing with that, she felt like people should understand that I am just going to sort of say, this is what I want. And then you guys just do whatever you're going to do to make that theme happen. And internally, all she cares about is resolving the issues that she's having with her father at this point. And then Kate Middleton wanted something specific that wasn't in line with what Meghan Markle wanted. As far as the flower girl dresses, it sounds like Kate Middleton wanted something different. I assume that the wedding has to have some sort of unity to the theme. And I got the impression here that Meghan Markle just didn't want to think about that stuff. She didn't really care about the wedding. This is all just a facade that's put on by the palace, in her opinion. So all she wants to do is try and mend whatever's going on with your father. And then Kate Middleton brings up this conflict that is going to make her have to think and interact a lot more. And emotionally, she just broke down and she started crying. All of this makes sense based on the language. So it seems like exactly what she's saying happened, that she was trying to do her part and she had other concerns and everybody was sort of aware of that. And Kate Middleton wanted her girls dressed a certain way, which mothers are going to do that, right? That is not a commentary on goodness or badness of a person. That is simply, you see your kids dressed up a certain way and you're like, I want my kids to be cute. I would like them dressed like this. That is a very human emotion. So the problem was that Kate Middleton wanted something and Meghan was not focused on interacting on that front. She wasn't particularly personally concerned with, just broke her down emotionally and she started crying. And then Kate Middleton came back later at some point, probably not in the too distant future, and apologized and gave her flowers and a card and said, sorry, this is your day. And it doesn't seem like Meghan Markle had really thought about it much past that, because if she has, if that was stamped in her mind as a problem, as something that was important enough to remember later, then she would not have said this incident. And she said it twice. She said, this I heard about, and then Oprah wants the details, and now she has to think about it. And she says, that was a turning point. So the turning point didn't have anything to do with Kate Middleton. The turning point had to do with the tabloids. So I want to emphasize in here
that I hear what my wife was saying, that there's Camp Kate and there's Camp Meghan, but that is something that is not in Meghan Markle's mind. I don't know what's in Kate's mind, and I don't know what's in everybody else's mind, but that is something that is not in Meghan Markle's mind. There is no feud between the two of them in her mind. All right. Oprah says, and there was a confrontation over the dresses. Meghan says, it wasn't a confrontation. And I actually don't think it's fair to her to get into the details of that because she apologized. Okay, well, this fits right in line with everything. First off, we have a negative statement followed by an explanatory statement, which means that the real cause of stress here was the palace, not Kate Middleton. It wasn't a confrontation. That's direct, straightforward. It's in the right tense. So that's a truthful statement. It wasn't a confrontation. And I actually don't think it's fair to her to get into the details of that because she apologized. What she's telling you is that this is a big deal because the palace made it a big deal. And we have an indicator of palace deception here. We have a negative statement followed by an explanatory statement, which means that not only is the palace the reason for the stress, but they lied about it. And this is subconscious language. I can't emphasize that enough. I'm not telling you that she's saying that here. I'm telling you that she's thinking that here. This is subconscious thought and subconscious language that she's using. Her brain is telling you directly that the palace lied about that story right here, even though she didn't say those words. And then she says, and I've forgiven her. So it wasn't a confrontation. It was a minor issue that she started crying about because of her father. Really, that was why she was emotional. And if that hadn't been a thing, then this probably wouldn't have even been a thing. But she says she apologized and I have forgiven her. What was hard to get over was being blamed for something that not only I didn't do, but that happened to me. Okay, she uses a negative here. So we know that that's from the palace. And that if there's any long-term pain that has come from that, it's not from Kate Middleton. It's from being blamed for something that not only she didn't do, but that happened to her. Now she continues here. I don't have to tell them, being the comms team, that's what she's referring to, what actually happened, but I can at least go on the record and say she didn't make her cry. All right, so now we have more information to fill in the gaps. When she says, I protected that information from coming out, now we have the rest of that story. So I know this didn't happen, this being the people that are involved in the wedding. I don't have to tell them what actually happened, but I can at least go on the record and say that Kate Middleton didn't make Meghan Markle cry. And Meghan Markle doesn't say here that she told them not to go. She told you before. She protected that story from coming out. That is what she was referring to right here. She didn't allow the other people in the wedding to go to the comms team and refute that story. And so now this had to have been 6 or 7 months later, right? Because the comms team wouldn't have been involved unless this was the story, not the incident itself. So Meghan Markle's not saying they came to her right after the incident. She's saying they came to her 6 or 7 months later and said, we were there. We know what happened. We don't have to go out and say what actually happened, but we can say that she didn't make you cry. And Meghan Markle is saying that she told them no. That's what she means by protected. She protected Kate here. She protected the story from coming out by not allowing the people who know the truth to speak.
Okay, now we have Oprah. So all the time the stories were out that you had made Kate cry, you knew all along, and the people around you knew that that wasn't true. Meghan Markle is saying not only the people around me, literally everyone knew it's not true. The comms people knew it's not true. The family knew it's not true. Everybody knew it's not true. I don't know at what level those decisions are made, but I do know that the firm can't act against the royal family's wishes. The royal family does hire and fire the members who work in the palace. That means the royal family does have direct control over them. So if the firm is putting out information that is contrary to the benefit of the royal family is going to shut them down. They're going to say, you're not allowed to say this. And if somebody is putting out information they don't like, they're going to fire them. So there is an element of direct control that the royal family has over the firm, the people who manage the family business, so to speak. So what does that mean? Meghan says everyone in the institution knew it wasn't true. I'm surprised that she is not able to mentally link the queen to this, because her subconscious language tells us that she really likes the queen on a personal level. She really likes the queen, and she really doesn't tie the queen into this, except you see some moments where she says everyone in the institution, which means on some level she has to be aware that the queen has to be aware of this, even though she's not willing to even imply anything negative. And that comes from a personal level, because lots of people in here are implying plenty of negative things against a lot of very high level family members, and they have no issue doing subconsciously or in some instances consciously. I'm just saying that the logic here is slightly contradictory to Meghan Markle's feelings for the queen. Okay, Oprah. So why didn't somebody just say that? And then Meghan says, that's a good question. Why didn't somebody say that? And she says, I'm not sharing that piece about Kate in any way to be disparaging to her. I think it's really important for people to understand the truth. But also, I think a lot of it that was fed into by the media, and I would hope that she would have wanted that corrected. And maybe in the same way that the palace wouldn't let anyone else negate it, they wouldn't let her, because she's a good person. And I think so much of what I have seen play out in this idea of polarity, where if you love me, you don't have to hate her. And if you love her, you don't have to hate me. All right, that's a jumble. It's a jumble of words here. And I had to reread this paragraph over and over until I finally was able to figure out what was wrong with this, which is that there is a full sentence that is inserted right in the middle of another sentence. This happens sometimes. People will start talking and they realize in the middle of a sentence or at the end of a sentence that what they just said or what they're about to say, you're not going to understand it if you don't understand something else. And so they will jump back in the story to insert a bit of information to make this make sense. Usually you do that at the end of a sentence. She did it in the middle of a sentence here. So in order to make this make sense, we have to tie two sentences together. Let's go through the stuff that actually makes sense first. So I'm not sharing that piece about Kate in any way to be disparaging to her. That is direct and it's honest, it's truthful. I think it's really important for people to understand the truth. Also direct, also truthful. But also, I think a lot of it that was fed into by the media, and I would hope that she would have wanted that corrected. And maybe in the same way that the palace, this is the problem here. We have one sentence that ends here, or the middle of the sentence is right here, and then this is the beginning of a new sentence. And then the resumption of this sentence here happens here. All right, now let's read these sentences. She says, and I would hope that she would have wanted that corrected because she's a good person. And I think so much of what I have seen play out is this idea of polarity. The other sentence is, and maybe in the same way that the palace wouldn't let anyone else negate it, they wouldn't let her. Now let's do this in the correct order. But also, I think a lot of it that was fed into by the media, the palace wouldn't let anyone else negate it. They wouldn't let her. And I would hope that she would have wanted that corrected because she's a good person. Okay, now when you separate those sentences and rearrange them, you understand what was going on in her mind. She was trying to correct stuff that was chronologically incorrect in the middle of the sentence. Then that leaves us at the end here with a problematic statement. I had to also spend a moment to figure out what she meant when she said, and I think so much of what I have seen play out is this idea of polarity. All right, so the polarity, the Kate versus Meghan storyline that's caused by the palace here, which is causing the negative statement with the explanatory statement. If you're wondering, why would she rearrange it that way? Because in deception detection, I'm always saying that if somebody rearranges something, your brain has rearranged it purposefully. Your brain is so powerful that it rearranges it in the way that the message is honest and truthful. So if she says it that way, for me to go back and read it in full sentences is almost like I'm going against my own rules of deception detection, except that you can't literally understand the sentences unless you read them in the right order. But now we need to go back and figure out what her brain did that made her actually insert a sentence in the middle of another sentence, and why it seemed okay to her frontal lobe, because actually the part of your brain that does language is still in your cerebral cortex. It's just not in your frontal lobe. Why did it rearrange the sentence like this? And it says the palace wouldn't let anyone else negate it. They wouldn't let her be cut. So she arranged this into a way that projects to the world that this is a huge lie from the palace, because this puts two negatives in front of a explanatory statement here. That is literally what her brain did. And it's in regards to the palace. So this whole thing is a lie that was produced, developed, and then perpetuated by the palace. So this is the only way that her brain can get that message across with the correct information. Then she says the idea of polarity, where if you love me, you don't have to hate her. And if you love her, you don't need to hate me. This is so crazy, because this is what her brain is thinking. But that is actually not the false narrative that we all know that the palace is putting out. They're creating the hero and the villain story because everyone loves a hero and a villain story. There has to be good and evil. This is a monarchy. This is a palace. There's a fairy tale here. And in order to have a fairy tale that people care about, you have to have conflict. It's the key to any story. And so they have to create conflict, and they have to create a hero and a villain. She's trying to say this idea of polarity, where if you love me, you have to hate her. Or if you love her, you have to hate me. That's the palace's narrative. But the Freudian slip here is what she wants you to believe. And hopefully all of that is very clear to you. So there's clearly a narrative that's put out. And the narrative that everybody knows is that there's a good guy here and a bad guy, and you can only like one of them. The only thing that her brain could be doing here is trying to tell you her truth, her reality. So she misstates the falsehood that the palace put out, and she tells you what she wants you to know. So for anybody out there who loves one of them and hates the other, that's a good story. And, you know, if that's you, do you. But it's not them. Meghan does not actually hate Kate. Hate to burst your bubble if you think they hate each other, but they don't. And Meghan makes that very clear through her subconscious use of verbiage here. All right, so Oprah says, you know, there are several stories that compared headlines written about you to those written about Kate. There were stories where Kate was praised for cradling her baby bump, and the headline about you doing the same thing said, Meghan can't keep her hands off her baby bump for pride or vanity. And Meghan says, what does it have to do with pride or vanity? The heck does that have to do with pride or vanity? But the storyline is clear. If you look at any of the storylines between the two of them, it's very clear what the palace is putting out. The only question you could have at this point is, does the palace have any direct control over what the tabloids and the news put out? Do they have a symbiotic relationship, or do they live independently of each other? And while we would like to think that they live independently of each other, Harry is going to give you some insight into that in a little bit here. And actually, now let's finish this real quick. Oprah, well, I'm just telling you about the stories, okay? And Meghan says, okay, I hear you. And then Oprah says, then there was a whole online piece about this, Kate eating avocados to help with morning sickness. And Meghan laughs, I heard about the avocado one. And Oprah says, but you were eating avocados. And Meghan, edge fueling murder, apparently. Oprah says, wolfing down a fruit linked to water shortages, illegal deforestation, and environmental devastation. And Meghan says, that's a really loaded piece of toast. And then says, I mean, you have to laugh at a certain point because it's just ridiculous. And again, we have an explanatory statement, and then it's just ridiculous is tied directly back to the narrative that's being put out by the palace. So, and Meghan Markle says, that's a really loaded piece of toast. And I mean, you have to laugh at a certain point because it's just ridiculous. And then Oprah laughs and says, that's good. That's a loaded piece of toast. And now my comment here is on Oprah's response, actually, not on the statement that we haven't covered yet, because Oprah says, that's good. That's a loaded piece of toast. What I want to mention here is that Oprah was taken off guard by wordplay and laughed and understood that that was a joke. And that actually tells us quite a bit about, I mean, we already know quite a bit about Oprah. You do. I don't. I haven't been watching Oprah my whole life, but I'm learning a lot about her from here. And I'm definitely going to look at Oprah interviews with people now going forward on my channel, now that I know that she's such a good interviewer, that allows me to get just a tremendous amount of information for you. So Oprah's response to her here tells me a couple of things about Meghan Markle. I think this is a good spot to start to profile Meghan Markle, who she is. And I'm just going to start to add this into all of my episodes because it's something that I do regardless of whether I mention it. And it's, I think, a big part of understanding the full story. So Meghan Markle is intelligent and has a quick wit. That is clear because she made a joke on spot to Oprah. And that tells us a couple of things. If and when we see indicators of stress in Meghan Markle in the future, we want to assess whether she's smart enough to understand her surroundings or if she lacks a general understanding of her environment, the family politics, etc. And so what we are trying to determine as we go through this interview is, does Meghan Markle not have a good grasp on reality, on what she clearly did not have a good grasp on what she was getting into? But whose fault is that? We have seen through the interview at this point that she is intelligent, but she's also smart. Smart means that she has a quick wit. So she's able to tell jokes to Oprah on the spot, which tells me a lot because Meghan Markle is composed when she's talking with some of the most powerful people in the world. Oprah is undeniably one of the most powerful people in the world. So anybody who can sit down and talk with Oprah on her level, showing no intimidation, and then be able to banter back and forth, that takes a level of intelligence, wit, and self-awareness that we have to take note, because if there's conflict later, and if I'm going to describe that conflict to being because Meghan Markle is not understanding of the reality that she's in, that is a statement of somebody who is of lower, not just intelligence, but I'm talking about somebody who has a not good self-awareness and not a good grasp on just the general environment that they're in any given moment. Some people just are not aware like that. And if I'm going to make that statement about Meghan Markle, I'm going to be wrong, because she is showing you here that that is not how she is. And so we cannot overlook that, is what I'm saying. If you're going to ascribe what happened later to an aspect of her personality, you got to get it right. What I've seen to this point is that it would be hard to argue that she doesn't understand what's going on around her. She is more likely to truly understand what's going on, which often leads to smart people having difficulty playing along when they're faced with a phony or superficial reality. Okay, so understand what that means. If somebody is having conflict with a certain reality, with a certain environment, they're either too dumb to play the role that they need to play, and so they keep generating conflict, or they're too smart and everything seems stupid and superficial to them, and they don't want to play along with it because they see themselves as being an adult and everybody else is playing like children. And so you've got to understand whether the person that you're talking about is looking at it from up here or whether they're looking at it from down here. It completely changes our analysis. So what I'm telling you is the way that she's handling this interview with Oprah tells me that the likelihood of her being a dummy at this point and being able to banter back and forth with Oprah, it tells me that she's not a dummy. It doesn't seem out of her depth at any point in this interview. She seems well adjusted. And Meghan says, "Oh man, Oprah, do you think there was a standard for Kate in general and a separate one for you? And if so, why?" Meghan says, "I don't know why." So there's two questions here. Are there different standards? And if so, why? So Meghan says, "I don't know why. I can see now that layers were at play. And again, they really seem to want a narrative of a hero and a villain. Is there a narrative that makes one out to be a hero and one out to be a villain?" And the answer is yeah. Oprah just showed you there all of these. Kate is so great because she holds her baby bump, and Meghan Markle is vain and has no humility because she holds her baby bump. So obviously there is a narrative of a hero and a villain. So this is truthful here. And she says, "I can see now what layers were at play." And so there are layers to this. She says she doesn't know why. Now, not knowing why, the way this is phrased in a negative means that it's sensitive. So it could be that she doesn't know why, or this could be deceptive. And I think that she does know why. When Meghan Markle here says, "I don't know why," she's not willing to give a in-depth and thorough explanation at this point. You don't have to have any deception detection to know that we're about to go into an area in this interview that talks a lot about race and how racist the palace is. And that was said. So that we're not going to pull that out through deception detection. We're going to see that written in black and white. So everybody knows about that part of the interview. So when she says, "I don't know why," I think what she's trying to say is that everyone knows that she has a general understanding of why. So we've seen just indicator after indicator after indicator to this point that anytime that Meghan Markle is using explanatory statements or negative statements or the combination of the two, she is referring directly to the palace. That is really so interesting. I'm just trying to process everything that I'm seeing here, which is a different way of using some verbiage, because the reason why we have a change in verbiage is so dramatic. Figuratively, I had to go to another place for a while and just try and wrap my mind around the reality of what I was seeing here. It's powerful and it's painful once you start to see where this is going. So this is a good place to stop. I'm going to pick up right from here. So I'm going to put these videos out close together so that you can just see one right after another. But this is a good breaking point for now. All right, see you in a second.